Hey, what's up, everybody? Of course, welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, a place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. Jr., you can follow me on social media, on Twitter. Of course, at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at VictoryPod1. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones podcast. I'm also the show's social media producer for Perfect Plex Talk Radio, of course, which comes on Mondays at 6 p.m., hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox. And, as you can all tell, this is definitely going to be quite a show, because I just got finished watching. Excuse me. Well, sorry about that. But yeah, like I said, of course, I just got finished watching, obviously, as you can tell, the Cowboys, the Cowboys documentary of America's team, the Gamblers Cowboys. And I must say, like I said, I'm going to the week in wrestling in a minute, and thank you very much for those that have been watching by way of Twitter. Shout out to you, and of course, for those who want to watch by way of YouTube, youtube.com/@VonResper Jr. Please make sure to like and subscribe for more great content. So anyway, like I said, I've officially gone through all 8 episodes, of the Cowboys documentary series, America's Team, the Gambler and his Cowboys. I talked about like the first half of it last week, and so, when I say that this is the NFL's equivalent of, this is the NFL's equivalent of The Last Dance. This documentary, if anything, did not disappoint at all whatsoever. You know what I mean? And so, of course, it obviously it touched on, very well known stories, but the detail that they go into, it's just next level. You know what I mean? And so it just goes to show, the rise and fall of a football empire. And obviously for the past 30 years now, we have if anything, the Cowboys have become one of the laughing stocks of the NFL. The biggest the most successful laughing stock at that 5 Super Bowls, but unfortunately become a caricature. The franchise has become a caricature of itself. You know what I mean? And so, and the thing about it is that it goes to show that Jerry Jones, time after time, finds ways to get in his own way, right? You know what I mean? Like, whether it was the way that his relationship with his former college teammate turned head coach Jimmy Johnson, the way that deteriorated, and it's like seeing how his ego got in the way. And Jimmy took accountability as well, and so the way that dynamic, rose, and then eventually it starts to erode, after that initial taste of success, and like I say, Jerry's got to the point where can't nobody tell him nothing. Of course that's a big reason why, one of the things, of course it caused the holdout for Emmett, which caused the team to suffer. And so it wasn't until Charles Hill had to crash out before Jerry had to wake up and sniff the coffee, like, what, it's the best thing to do is to resign, to resign a franchise player. And they did that, and of course it paid dividends, ended up winning back-to-back Super Bowls. But the thing is, you can start to see, that the ego slowly, begin to really creep in, especially when you start going even deeper into the playoffs, and and just the way that Jerry, wanted to take so much of that credit and rub Jimmy the wrong way, and so because of that, Jerry obviously had been on record, as saying they want to fire Jimmy, and of course he did just that, especially with the statement they made saying he could get anybody that coaches Cowboys to win the Super Bowl. He did just get anybody that coaches Cowboys. Barry Switzer, yes, we did win the Super Bowl, but at the same time, the team, the dynamic, the chemistry was not the same. You know what I mean? And so, and because of that, and because Jimmy was gone, the team lost a lot of their discipline, right? And so, and of course, even though, Barry Switzer, sorry about that. And the thing is, even though he's he can be a very personable guy, but at the same time, you know, he had a sort of I don't really care type of attitude. Just let the players, be who they are, and not really, um, set any type of tone of discipline. They lack boundaries, and, and because of that, that's why the team unraveled the way it did. Uh, Especially when it came to a star player like Michael Irvin, and a lot of the trials and tribulations that he went through. I mean, things that I knew about. Obviously, his very infamous cocaine use. You know what I mean? Um, but at the same time, I didn't certain things like I didn't know that they're going to hit him with 20 years and going to hit out in his life and all this other type of stuff. I was like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like this is you want to talk about some super drama. That was enough to have an HBO special. You know what I mean? Like just the story behind behind that Cowboys squad. That was enough for an HBO special in of itself. Something that would give The Wire, Sopranos, Game of Thrones a run for their money. You know what I mean? And of course, like I said, as far as that, and that's the reason when Michael Irvin is the way he is, and carries himself the way he does, and what I mean, especially when um, how much God has transformed your life. You know what I mean? And like I say, like those type of things, are what made those are things that have made him, have made Michael into who he is now, right? And so, not only that, but also with the way that Barry's relationship with Troy deteriorated. I mean, to the point of no return. And the thing is, because uh, Dallas lacked that much needed structure that they had with Jimmy, Troy found himself having to, be more of the coach and be more vocal than he ever was under Jimmy. You know what I mean? And so with Jimmy, there was, a sense of mutual respect and trust for one another, right? Um, and the thing is, and the thing about it was that, you know, even though Jimmy was a disciplinarian, at the same time, he wasn't going out of his way to disrespect Troy. He wasn't stepping on Troy's toes or anything like that. Switzer, you know what I mean, like his recklessness and not really, not wanting to be that type of guy, and it rubbed Troy the wrong way. And so because of that, you know, Troy was unraveling and crashing out more than ever. It was completely out of his element, out of his nature, out of his character. And so, you know, um, because of that, apparently, like apparently Switzer came to him and said that, there were rumors about Troy being a racist because, he was screaming at a lot of his black teammates. And so, thankfully, and it was obvious, that his teammates are on the documentary, of course, that they, if anything, they all took his back. From Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, Charles Haley, Dion, Nate Newton, Ken, like anybody, like you name it, whoever it was, you name it, they all had his back, and their thing was, if Troy was such a racist, they would have dealt with that a long, long time ago. You know what I mean? And so to find out that Troy had to deal with those rumors going into the Super Bowl, I never knew that. Remember this, of course, this was at a time, um, when I was like in first grade, going to second, right? Like I said, if anything, last time the Cowboys won the Super Bowl, yeah, I was in, like I say, I was in first grade. Say it was, yes, so it was because it was like 6, going to 7. But yeah, you know what I mean, and so So yeah, so you know, seems like, uh, so the thing is, like I said, growing about, I didn't know, and obviously I was old enough, right? And so to find out, fast forward all these years later, that those were the headlines going into that final Super Bowl. I was like, ugh, man, and so Troy himself even said that with those rumors and stuff like that, all those rumors, he was like, you know what, that's that's where you have to draw the line with Switzer, you know. Um, what I mean, it really came off that Switzer trying to make it, make some type of smear campaign, and what I mean, like just for for the sake of making Troy look bad, and and the thing is, of course, uh, Barry Switzer even said himself that his biggest regret was how he handled his relationship with Troy. That was his biggest regret um, as the coach. And so, the thing is, two things can be true. On one end, you have players who had, more personable experience with Switzer, like Charles Hamlin. You know, how Switzer checked up on, how Switzer, checked on him and everything like that, and he was asking how things going with him and whatnot, especially with his mental health. What I mean, like for Barry to have the type of empathy. What I mean, and so other players had had stories about him as well. More positive, more personable stories. But at the same time, even with that, he still found a way to rub certain players the wrong way, and not just certain players, but your star quarterback. That's a really bad look. You know, that, and also, um, of course, like the second half starts, going to, starts to feature Deion Sanders more, and how much of a major sign that was. He had become at that point the highest paid defensive player in NFL history. And he was worth every quarter of it, right? And so, and like I said, and the thing is, especially with, and obviously this is common knowledge, but the way they confirmed it, especially with the way that he played uh, defense against Michael Irvin in the NFC Championship game. You know, um, I also like, I also like, before that, I also like, I think, of course, backtracking a little bit. I like how they talked about, the NFC Championship game with the Cowboys and 49ers. Um, of course, that was in the 94-95 season, when the Niners won under Steve Young. And how San Francisco was blowing Dallas out. By this point, like seeing if anything, the Cowboys have become complacent. Um, they, like I said, they didn't have the same structure that they had under Jimmy, and it showed. I mean? Like, the thing is, even though they were riding high, when it came to their division and whatnot, they're still world beating superstars. But when it mattered most against the arch rival, the 49ers, those blemishes got exposed. To the point, to the point where the 49ers were blowing them out at one point. I think it was like 21 or something, in 20 December, whatever. And then eventually Dallas orchestrated the comeback. That's when they had to wake up and realize who they were. And so, so if anything, I said they orchestrated a great comeback. And but at the end of the day, yeah. So if anything, like at the end of the day, Dallas came back swinging, but also ultimately, 49ers found a way to maintain their lead, and like I said, they found a way. Of course, they maintained the lead, and and Deion, was definitely a game changer, a series clincher. With the way with the way he shut down shut down that passing for Michael, and of course we all know the 49ers went on to win the Super Bowl, and that's what made Jerry a believer. And so if anything, Deion was certainly transcendent and transcendent impact player. And you know, I mean, and obviously it very much showed, definitely showed up in the team's chemistry. And so, you know, I mean, so as far as that, like I said, with that, at least those were the ups. But you know, by the time you get to the second half, you know, the downs are were definitely reflected in terms of it seems like in terms of Dallas's unfortunate downfall, and how like I say just the way that that team had unraveled, and it was a very it was a very bitter ending, and it just happened. It just happened. Just how that but yeah, like I said, as far as that, I mean, like I say, just like I said, just the way, just the way that this team unfolded, and and just the way that Phoenix, and the way that, like one of the central themes, of this series was a relationship, between Jerry and Jimmy, and how and how that dissolved, and that how Jimmy would often be Dallas's biggest critic as a commentator, and and those even I think there was one game in particular. I want to say it was the NFC championship game against Green Bay, where they ended up ended up having a face-to-face encounter um, on the sideline, and it was one of those things where, I'm pretty sure Jerry's heart was racing real fast, because he didn't know whether or not, that Jimmy was going to take him out. Let's just call it what it is. What I mean? And like I said, it's just going to show how frosty the relationship had become. And at the same time, you could see that, by themselves, they never, had the same dynamic, as they did when they were together, right? So, so the thing is, even though Jerry won one more Super Bowl after Jimmy left, but the team consistently was not the same. Jimmy ended up going to coach the Miami Dolphins, but obviously that never worked out, right? And so, and not only that, but they even showed a clip um, of the game where the Dolphins played the Cowboys, and Dallas won, and it was in Miami, right? And so, I mean, like I said, it just goes to show that together, they not to sound like a cliche, but they were absolutely much better together than they were apart. And you know, I like how they eventually reconciled, even though Jerry had been on record to say that Jimmy Johnson would never go into the Cowboys Ring of Honor, right? And you know, um, and of course, Michael Irvin pointed out, how God uh, has a funny way of doing things, and how you should be careful. Excuse the expression. What you put your mouth on, meaning, be careful what you speak on. You know what I mean? So even though, Jerry verbally said that this wouldn't happen, but the way their paths, would eventually change, and and just the way that the way the time, would eventually, eventually cause both of them, to have change of heart. Like clearly, that clearly, it had to be done, and so so of course, eventually, finally, uh, Jimmy, got the news that he would go into Cowboys Ring of Honor. If anything, Jimmy should have gone to the Ring of Honor the same time that the Big Three went. The same time that Troy, Emmett, and Michael owned, right? And but if anything, that was another case of Jerry's ego, being the central figure as to why, if it just goes to show how destructive, Jerry's ego has always been, and how I don't know why it's been so hard. Excuse me, I don't know why it's been so hard for him to not see that. If anything, Jerry has shown that he is the most oblivious out of his entire circle. He's the most oblivious as to wondering why Dallas has not duplicated that success, why they have not replicated that previous success. And it's all because of him. It's all because of him, doing absolutely way too much. And because of his narcissism, because of his ego, that's caused him to burn bridges and run some valuable people away. That's why Bill Parcells didn't last long with the Cowboys. Because of the fact that that Jerry insists on being not only the owner but the GM as well. And so that so that's why the more strong-willed coaches, turn down the opportunity of coaching Dallas in a minute, in a second. That's why Belichick never coached. Of course, after leaving New England, right? What I mean. So, it's like, for example, stuff like that, and Like I said, that's one of the things that I picked up out of this, and Like I said, it's just so many different stories. It's almost like where to start, and also the way that they detail the decline of their careers, and how one by one the best players slowly and surely started to leave. Of course, whether it was Michael Irvin and that freak injury against the Eagles in Philly, which ended his career. And of course he suffered spinal injury, neck injury, and so and of course that was the end of his career after 12 years. We saw Troy Aikman suffer his 9th concussion, which would be the career-ending concussion against Washington. Dion will end up going to Washington himself, and so Emmett was the last one standing, and he made it clear that within his 13th season, he wanted to become the NFL's all-time leading rusher, because Walter Payton, his predecessor, had accomplished that in 13 seasons. So it was great that Emmett broke the record. It would have been better if his teammates were there. It would have, added up, just added a whole new layer to it. Just just felt like an even bigger deal. Not saying it wasn't, because it was, but it would have been something even more epic, a little bit more special. Had Troy handed the ball off to him, instead of being a commentator. Had Michael been in uniform instead of being on the sideline, and so they talked about that, and how Emmett and Jerry decided it was time, for them to part ways. He ends up going to Arizona, and by the time he gets there, puts on a uniform, especially when he plays against the Cowboys, you just feel that guilt, that regret, that shame on Emmett's face. And that is why, once his contract with the Cardinals expired, once that was done, he signed an exclusive like 1-day contract to officially retire as a Dallas Cowboy. Press conference and all. You know what I mean? So we want to talk about someone who's the most synonymous. You know what I mean? Like if who's the most synonymous with the Cowboys. Out of all those historically great players, Emmett, in my estimation, is my number one. He's the first player I think of when I think of the Cowboys. I know, of course, all depends on eras. Because I know there are people, who bring up Roger Staubach, bring up Bob Lilly, players like that. But when you look at the resume, that speaks for itself. And I know there are people, people that are going to bring up his offensive line, but during that time that Emmett was out, that team with that same offensive line struggled without him in the mix. So it's one thing to have a great line, but it's another thing to have the skill to execute those plays. And to, there's a certain technique that Emmett had. There was a certain discipline that he had, which is why, his career lasted, as long as it did, right? And so that's why I feel it's important, that something like that, should never be taken for granted, right? And and so you said like this, um, you know, when like I said, if anything, if there was one player who I would consider to be, let's just say, if anything, sort of like the logo, if you will, of the Cowboys, like um, if I'm sorry, if there was any particular player I would consider to be, let's just say, so, sort of logo um, of the logo of the Dallas Cowboys, uh, I would look at someone like Emmitt Smith, right? And so I mean, like just because of his consistency, it's consistency, his longevity, you know what I mean? Just what he meant to that franchise, should never be understated, right? And so when I think of, and matter of fact, as I'm thinking about it now, I'm considering, coming up, with my top 10 uh, all-time greatest, Cowboys list. And so let's just say, it's pretty tough. And so I would say at, just when you look at the impact um, that these players have had on the team, what I mean? And like I said, when it comes to the body of work, when it comes to, the influence and everything like that. So I would say, as far as my top 10 Cowboys, it's going to be a rough one. It's almost, if anything, it's almost like pulling teeth sometimes. Hey, little bro, what's up? How things going? Thanks for checking in. But yeah, like if anything, I would say that you know my top 10 Cowboys, I would say, are uh, DeMarcus Ware, Larry Allen, Mel Renfro, like number 10 DeMarcus Ware, number 9 Larry Allen, number 8 Mel Renfro, number 7 Michael Irvin, number 6 Tony Dorsett, number 5 Randy White, number 4 Troy Aikman, number 3 Bob Lilly, number 2 Roger Staubach, and number 1 Emmitt Smith. So if anything, like I said, as far as my estimation, I would say, I would say that those are my top 10 Cowboys of all time. And of course, honorable mention, go out to the likes of Deion Sanders, Jason Witten, You know what I mean? Um, and so yeah, so as far as that, like I say, those are my top 10 right off the top of my head. Um, but yeah, like I said, if anything, those are the main ones that really deserve the most, specifically, especially when it comes to the contributions that you made within that uniform. So if anything, those are my top 10. But enough of that. Now it's time to go into the weekend wrestling, and so I'm just going to start off with Friday Night SmackDown, and so of course, um, I'm gonna go into some of the main highlights, and so if anything, of course, in this case, we see that John Cena definitely needs eyes in the back of his head, um, because of two problems he's facing, kind of like caught between a rock and a hard place. So we see that that John Cena receives a huge huge ovation in his last appearance in Dublin, Ireland. What I mean? Of course, they're at the way they adore this 17-time world champion. Their admiration was cut short by Logan Paul, and so the new rivals, if you will, you want to call them that, haven't changed words. See, of course, Logan Paul, like John Cena, is an actor who can wrestle, and Cena called what's called Logan Parasite, leeching off of WWE. And of course, John Cena also echoed fan sentiment that he was wasting time with Logan when he could be delivering classics with Seth Rollins and AJ Styles. Very true. You know what I mean? And so, of course, their verbal altercation escalated blows and ended with an attitude adjustment from John Cena. So of course, backstage we saw Drew McIntyre tell Logan Paul he got caught up in Cena's aura, and McIntyre advised him to correct things by any means. And not long after that, Drew McIntyre interrupted, of course, the SmackDown's commentary team to insult Cody Rhodes. Then all of a sudden, Randy Orton, who's absent since losing the tag match with Jelly Roll at SummerSlam, of course, I hit Drew McIntyre out of nowhere with RKO. And when I say that has become a new meme, a new GIF, you know what I mean? Like, if anything, that was perfect timing. That was epic right there. Randy, if anything, just like he did with Cena the night after WrestleMania. Like if anything, Orton strikes again when it comes to the meme-worthy RKO. I thought that was pretty cool. Of course, we saw that. We also saw John Cena leaving the three arena at the tail end of SmackDown, and of course, Nick Aldis caught up with him, informing him of a message from Brock Lesnar. And so, before Nick Aldis could even pass the message along, Logan Paul knocks Cena out, of course, with a sucker punch. And of course, it's kind of hard to really get excited for this match, especially with very few singles matches that Cena's had on his farewell tour. At least on the plus side, on the positive side, we definitely see John Cena punish Logan Paul. But also, side note, I think it's still insulting that Logan Paul again gets a 90 on WWE 2K, which is ridiculous. Still getting a higher rating than Kurt Angle. I'm not with that at all whatsoever. But just like on 2K24, I definitely make a change with that. I just wish that that they would have higher, Kurt would have a higher rating at the beginning of the game anyway. But whatever. But yeah, of course, we also, like I said, we see Cena, Logan Paul, what's Brock Lesnar, Drew McIntyre, Cody Rhodes, Randy Orton. They're all loosely tied together, tethered together. So it was a great way to maximize time and get the environment more excited. And so in other SmackDown news, the team of Mello Don't Miz, of course, Carmelo Hayes and The Miz defeat the Motor City Machine Guns by way of pinfall. And so not only that, but Piper Niven surprisingly defeated Charlotte Flair by way of pinfall in the Shinoku driver. And that's because Chelsea Green outfired, ran interference during the match. The Street Profits defeated MFTs, Jason Mateo and Tonka Loa by way of pinfall after Montez Ford had a frog splash. Jim Uso intervened on their behalf to level the playing field. as the Street Profits will face Mello Miz in a title elimination match. Title eliminator. Of course, we see Damian Priest and Alice the Black brawl around the arena. And of course, there's a planned match between Alice the Black and R-Truth that was canceled after Truth flew to Dublin, Georgia by mistake. Whatever. And of course, Jay Cargill took him straight to defeat Nia Jax and Becky Lynch by way of pinfall after landing back-to-back moonsaults on Nia Jax. If anything, I would say that the segments were just as good, not better, better than the match itself. And so and of course, like I said, shout out to Becky Lynch, has been on the roll on the mic, and so as far as Friday, I definitely like that. Definitely like Becky's blue fur coat and her orange, white, and black Jordans. I was like, oh shoot! I was like, that's pretty cool. Especially like orange is one of the colors of our flag anyway. So only makes perfect sense. And so next up we're gonna of course we'll talk about Monday Night Raw. And so Monday Night Raw, as far as that, took place in Birmingham, England. And it starts off with Roman Reigns opening the show by addressing the England crowd. It was definitely whipped up in a frenzy, singing Roman's name. Roman, singing his name. He said that he has to admit that he's not the same guy anymore, but that maybe he could draw something out of himself close to who he was before. And he then said that Cody Rhodes predicted a year and a half ago that someone would come along and take everything from him, and that Seth Rollins and his new crew did exactly that. As a matter of fact, I was there that night when Cody made that prediction about Roman. And so fast forward, all this time later, here we are now, right? And so, as far as that, no more title, no more bloodline, no more wise man, none of that. And Roman admitted, he acknowledged, no pun intended, he no longer has a bloodline behind him, but the crowd was quick to remind him that Jey Uso has backed him up on multiple occasions recently, including the tag match at SummerSlam where he defeated Braun Breaker. And of course, Reigns goes on to say that they took everything from him, as I said before, the titles, the bloodline, the family, and they needed to find something else to take, of course, referring to his shoes. And of course, Braun Breaker, Paul Heyman, and of course, Paul Heyman said it was 5 years ago that that he left Brock Lesnar to become Reigns' wise man and to create the bloodline while running the company. And so now Reigns is alone while Heyman is with the new now title division, as they're running things. And then of course Paul, was the former wise man, told his former tribal chief, they came out, they told Reigns they came out to disrespect him, not out of malice, but out of love. He said that Reigns needs self-love, and that Reed would be the one to give it to him. Whatever. That's self-love, and I don't even know what hate is. But anyway, and not only that, of course, funny thing is, Bronson Reed has a shirt that says Tribal Thief, and it has Roman's Jordans on the shirt as well. I thought it was pretty hilarious. I thought it was clever. So Bronson Reed ended up taking to the mic and said that their match on Sunday was about disrespect. It was about the real bloodline, that Reed's Samoan ancestors were tougher than his. This led to a massive, to a huge brawl that the officials struggled to break up. And the thing is, what really drew the line, was when Roman said that Bronson belonged to him. I was like, oh shoot! I was like, well then, you know what I mean? And so as far as that, and of course, we also have, of course, in other news, we have Braun Breaker defeat LA Knight by way of pinfall after a spear with the help from Seth Rollins. So the main event kind of started off a little rocky, a little bumpy. After Roman Reigns, jumped Braun Breaker backstage and delivered Superman punched LeBron Sweet for the official count to get him out of the arena. And of course, LA Knight jumped in the opportunity to attack Braun Breaker before dragging him out the ring. They brought him a pretty solid match before Seth Rollins came out for the distraction. And so, of course, you're winning by what pinfall and other, Braun Breaker. So if anybody's in the future, but this is definitely Braun Breaker. If anything, I would say that LA Knight is more DDP type of role. What I mean by that is someone who's a late starter. He's not quite on DDP's level, ring star power wise, but in terms of that stage of his career, he's not far from that. But as far as what else happened overall, Dragon Lee defeat JD Bobblehead by way of pinfall after hitting Operation Dragon. Kofi Kingston defeat Penta by way of pinfall after hitting Trouble in Paradise. And of course that's because Xavier Woods and Grayson Waller provided multiple distractions and interferences to help to help Kofi get the win. And we saw that Raw General Manager Adam Pearce informed Stephanie Bakir that she would no longer compete at Clash in Paris after Naomi was forced to vacate the women's title last week with a pregnancy announcement. And so it says, of course, Adam Pearce says that Stephanie will still get we'll get a title match with a new opponent at a later date. Then Nikki Bella challenged Intercontinental Champion Becky Lynch to a match at Clash of Paris, which Becky accepted. And it's crazy that Becky is getting so much of this hate because of her Ozzy Osbourne comments. And if anything, I saw it more as a compliment to Ozzy and an insult to the fans at the same time. Meanwhile, Ozzy's daughter Kelly took exception to what Becky said, and thought that she had gone too far, that she had crossed the line. However, little did Kelly know that she tagged the wrong Becky Instagram account. So she tagged Becky Lynch fan 11, and that's not even Becky's social media handle at all. And so unfortunately, this poor Becky fan, had to wake up to just just notifications that are just flooded with all kind of inflammatory comments or whatever the case is. I mean, just whatever it is. RIP to the mentions. That's all I have to say. But I find it funny that Becky has to be the chicken heel against Nikki Bella of all people. But Becky is going to retain the women's IC title. Obviously, not only is Becky leagues better than Nikki, both in the ring and on the mic, but I must say when it comes to women, I would say that Becky's mic work is among the absolute best, if not the very best itself. Especially with that savage clapback that she had on Nikki about John Cena when she said you can't see him anymore. I was like, yeah, you can't recover off that. That was hilarious right there. I was like, yeah, if anything, Becky has provided some comedic gold on the mic. You know what I mean? And so if anything on Monday, Mike and I, we're talking about it. That's one of the things we mentioned is how Becky doesn't get enough credit on the mic, and how we really need to start a legit conversation about the greatest women on the microphone. Becky's definitely up there. Charlotte for sure. Trish, you already knew, what she'll bring to the table. Bianca, any day, any time, any moment. Rhea, Bayley certainly. To a certain extent, even Sasha / Mercedes. So Nia by far, come on now. Nia Jax growing by leaps and bounds in the mic. So, so if anything, I would think that, somewhere in the future, I don't know when, but I definitely want to come up with my own list of the top 10 female talkers in wrestling history. When it comes to the men, as as I said on Monday's Perfect Place. When it comes to the men, I would say that the more ironclad, unanimous names are the likes of The Rock, Stone Cold, Roddy Piper, Ric Flair, Chris Jericho, Macho Man, um, you know, CM Punk, Dusty, Miz. You know what I mean? Trying to think of well, I have it like number 10. You know what I mean? Like if anything, I don't know if I want to put Roman that. Like I said, Cena. You know what I mean? So as far as as far as that, like I said, if anything, no particular order. Like I said, you look at Rock, Austin, Piper, Flair, Jericho, Savage, Cena, Punk, Dusty, Miz. Those, in my estimation, are the unanimous top 10 on the mic when it comes to the men. That's just in my estimation. When it comes to the women, I think it's time for that, to open the floor for that discussion at some point. Because there have been some women who've been able to, bring it, on the microphone as well. And so, yeah. So, like I said, as far as that, of course, also speaking of women, we have Rhea Ripley defeat Roxanne Perez, pinfall after hitting the Riptide. After the match, Raquel and Roxanne continued to try to assault Rhea after causing issues during the match. The Io Sky ran in to make the save. Later, Asuka and Kyrie saying furious. Of course, when they saw Io run to Rhea's aid, and they were even more furious backstage when they saw Io and Rhea having a conversation. Little did they know that Io was telling Rhea, that she needed to, maintain a certain distance, from each other, right? The only thing that they saw was Rhea and Io hugging each other, and so that just made them absolutely flip. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I was like, oh, yeah, that's definitely the end of the Kabuki Warriors for sure. At least when it comes to Io's part of the group. You know what I mean? So yeah, like as far as that, and then we have AJ Styles defeat Finn Balor by way of pinfall after hitting the Styles Clash. I feel it. Speaking of that match, I feel as though WWE really dropped the ball when it comes to like some type of Bullet Club reference, a Bullet Club connection. Because they've both been leaders of the group, and I mean, you get a built-in story right there. Just like with Cody and AJ. That was, you want to talk about finishing a story. You get one right there when it came to the Bullet Club history. Same thing when it comes to Finn Balor and AJ Styles. You know what I mean? So that you want to talk about missing money. That's it right there, right? And so that does it when it comes to Monday Night Raw. And so now I want to talk about NXT. Matter of fact, I want to talk about a Heat Wave. And I will say there wasn't too much to really, write home about when it came to Heat Wave, other than the best match, was Obafemi versus Javon Evans. As Mike said on Monday, black on black round. But I do know that whenever they get in the ring, they always have great chemistry, and so Heat Wave was no different. And the winner, and still your reigning defending NXT champion, the kaiju of NXT himself, the ruler, Oba Femi. And right after that, we have Ricky Saints stepping up to him. I'm like, as great as Ricky is, ain't no way that them convinced, convincing that he'll be the one to dethrone Oba Femi and take away that title. I'm like, nah. I know that that you definitely want to make the most of this investment, but against someone like Oba, who's, like I said, a world beater, no way. It would have to be a fluke, in order for Oba to lose that title, like say, unless it's a fluke, or or he's heading to the main roster at some point. I mean, at least that I'm unaware of. That would be those are the only reasons why. So anyway, so of course, as far as looks like, but anyway, like I say, as far as the matches for the night, we have Blake Monroe versus Kalani Jordan. Kalani Jordan, of course, ends up winning by way of pinfall, the split-legged moonsault. And so afterwards, we also saw Jordan Grace, chase Blake Monroe, chase her back into the locker. So as far as that, and then not only that, we also have a live reel for a blindfold match between Lexis King and Miles Bourne. So Miles Bourne makes it interesting, gets interviewed on the stage, and he said his sight is still a little blurry from getting sprayed in the face, but his blindfold match, so it's going to work out. You know what I mean? So of course, he asked the crowd to help him out and tell him he's getting close to Lexis King, because he can feel the vibrations, and he needs all the energy that they can get in this. That's when they end up going to break. But and of course we all know that Miles' disability when it comes to his hearing, and so so as far as that, whatever he lacks with this, he can make up for when he feels the energy of the fans. And so we see the Lexis King versus Miles Bourne blindfold match. Lexis King, of course, Lexis King ends up winning. And of course, we also saw Kendall Gray and Red Sinclair versus the Culling, Izzy Dane and Taylor Paxton. The Culling win by pinfall with a lagger bomb from Izzy Dane on Red Sinclair. And so after commercial, Trick Williams cuts a quick promo to hype up of course upcoming shows and stuff like that. Then we also have Josh Briggs versus Ricky Saints, NXT Championship number 1 contenders match. The winner of this match is pretty obvious. Ricky Saints, by way of pinfall, the tornado DDT, becoming the number 1 contender for the NXT Championship. Very solid match, if you will. I expect nothing less from someone of Ricky's caliber. And so, of course, backstage we saw that Lola Vice was having a chat with Soul Brooke and Zaria when Jada Parker rolled up. We saw Lola Vice was being defensive, but Jada Parker tells her she's not here to start anything, just to give her props for winning. Then Lash Legend rolls up, and Jada Parker cracks on her for losing. Nia Jackson walks off and they go to break. And so we saw that Ricky Saints is still in the ring and sums up with Femi. And Ricky says that Femi's barely hanging in there, and everything comes to an end, and he can't beat the world forever. And Oba says he sees fear in Ricky's eyes, and they call him absolute. So congratulations, your career is going to new heights. And he has a date with Destiny. On that day, he'll show him that he's not special. And when people challenge him, he shows them the true levels of the talent. And in Ricky's case, he's going to make absolutely mediocre. And, of course, the lights go down and come back up with Dark State in the crowd. And then Deion Lennox cuts a promo saying Dark State, Dark State leads the way. And Osiris Griffin tells Ricky Oba they can either leave or catch a beat down. Saquon Sugars says they can ask Hank Tank, and Saint says he chooses the beating, and 4-on-2 brawl breaks out. And of course we also saw Hank Tank even the odds. And so that's why next week officially at NXT we have Oba Femi and Ricky Saints teaming up with Hank Tank to take on Dark State. And of course we saw that April Rain talks about in her office. It says Soul Worker needs a new number 1 contender. To begin on September 2nd, there's going to be a tournament featuring the main roster, NXT, AAA, and TNA talent. Chelsea Green, Alba Fire, All Eagle, Ethan Page make the entrance in the ring. So then we have Alba Fire versus Tyra May Steele. Versus Tyra May Steele from the Olympic gold medal winner. Gold medal winner was also on LFG. Tyra May Steele is the winner of this match. Then we have Fatal Influence, Fallon Henley, JC Jane, and Jasmine Nix versus Lola Vice, Soul Ruka, and Zaria. And the winners, and of course, the winners of this match, Lola Vice, Sol Ruka, and Zarya by way of pinfall. The spinning back fist from Lola Vice to Fallon Henley. Um, so, that's the when it comes to weekend wrestling. Um, but yeah, so as far as that, if anything, that's about it. Matter of fact, I'm gonna say that the next week's NXT matches, have already been finalized. So I'm gonna give a rundown for that. So next week's NXT will feature Jada Parker versus Lash Legend in the first round match in the NXT Speed No More Contenders tournament between Candice LeRae and TNA's Zaya Brookside. And I like how we got to see the Women's Evolve champion, Callie Armstrong, and Callie Armstrong in a backstage segment or whatever with Nikita Lyons or something. But yeah, so as far as that, and then we're going to talk about we're going to talk about NXT No Mercy. So that's well, actually, NXT No Mercy is going to take place on September 27th, so we definitely have a ways to go with that. So as far as that, as far as like the major title matches that are going to be announced, Oba Femi versus Ricky Saints for the NXT Championship, JC Jane versus Lola Vice for the NXT Women's Championship, and a potential defense for the NXT North American Women's Championship from Sol Ruka. But yeah, as far as that, that's about it. And of course, when it comes to I know that people want to say that there's some sort of like wrestling war between WWE, AEW, New Japan, and TNA, and whatnot. And so I would say it's somewhat of a war, but not. It doesn't really have the same feel as before. Just because I think primarily just because of how WWE is able to strategically monopolize their competition as they have been doing historically, and not saying that it's right, but it happens time and time again, and so it's just like, I guess you could say the only other competition that they pretty much have, not so much with AEW, but really amongst themselves, especially with the partnership with TNA and how TNA feels more like a pipeline for anybody who was initially released by WWE, and they have the window of opportunity to reemerge under the TNA umbrella. For instance, when Dana Brooke got fired for WWE, now she's in TNA as Ash by Elegance, and she's made an appearance on NXT under that name. So as far as that, so anytime that they want to do something with, let's say, Dolph Ziggler, for example, he'll show up as Nick Nemeth, rather than Dolph Ziggler. So, if anything, like I said, I look at that. Like I said, I look at TNA as more of a pipeline, with WWE. Now, when it comes to AEW, that's definitely a competition right there. I've seen when it comes to New Japan, to a certain extent, especially with that talent, ends up going over to AEW in the first place anyway. And so, I will say that that other promotion is definitely, like made themselves a little bit more competitive, especially, with the way that Mercedes Moné has been making an even bigger name for herself, and making even more of a case for herself among that GOAT conversation. When it comes to the women, and of course now she's holding multiple championships. And really, if anything, she came, she saw, and she conquered. That's the best way I could describe, Mercedes Moné outside of WWE. You know, so at first I wasn't too much of a believer, but with the way that with the way that she's been making moves outside of WWE, when it comes to another promotion, you know, uh, very much impressive. I mean, like if anything, like for me personally, I'm still still more a fan of of the original Sasha Banks, persona for Horsewoman and all that other type of stuff. But kudos to her, for betting on herself and and leaving the stamp, you know, uh, that she's left, these days, right? And so, of course, congratulations to both her and Naomi with the way that they bet on themselves, after they've been, disrespected by a previous regime, and what I mean, and like I said, for them to have, some of the best work of their careers, after that. I mean, that speaks volumes. That's a testament to their greatness. That's a testament to their excellence. Uh, you know, what I mean? So as far as that, um, you know, excellence. Um, Unfortunately, like I said, unfortunately, the monopolizing um, has always been there. I don't know how much, like, I think at this point, it's one of those things that you could kind of expect, especially when it comes to WWE. Fair, unfair, if you will. And I will say that when it comes to international shows, it kind of takes away from the experience, especially when you have shows that take place earlier. You know, um, especially when a fan like myself who's so used to watching it, um, in the evening after I get off work. And so the thing is, however, when it comes to this, it's just like you know, um, it just doesn't really hit the same um, when it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But I mean, but then again, of course, that's more so to do with time zone difference, whatever. You know, but at the same time, it still takes away some of the you know some of the aura, if you will, versus having the shows in the evening. Even when it comes to the PLEs, those 1 o'clock PLEs, you know, I mean, that's during the heart of my weekend. So there's no way I'm going to be heading back home just to sit down and watch a PLE when I have the whole day ahead of me outside. Like, come on, I enjoy being outside, plain and simple. So what I would do is just stream it from my phone, just by sitting down somewhere or something, right? Or at least catch it later by the time I get home. But yeah, what I mean, like if anything, I'll say those are some of my thoughts when it comes to like I see like so when it comes to this sort of wrestling war, if you will, um, and so it's somewhat of a war, but not as much as it could be, just because of how some of the other quote unquote competition, if you will, don't really have the same resources and um, that WWE has, especially with WWE's TKO partnership and everything like that, and also um, bringing TNA under their umbrella, right? What I mean, and now, of course, that's not to say that other promotions don't have uh, talented stars themselves, which they do, but it's just that, it's just like you're fighting an uphill battle going against an empire, a juggernaut like WWE. Um, so those are, you know, just some of my thoughts about it. And so now it is time for birthdays. So on August 27th, which is today, Yolanda Adams turned 64. Um, WWE legend Sergeant Slaughter turned 77. August 29th, the King of Pop himself, Michael Jackson, would turn 67. Stan Hansen turned 76. Which on August 30th. Fran Hampton would turn 77. Chief Robert Parrish from Boston Celtics turned 72. August 31st. Of course, Chris Tucker turns 54. Jeff Hardy. All right, what's up? It was up. Like I said, of course, August 31st, Chris Tucker turns 54. Jeff Hardy turns 48. And of course, September 1st, John Thompson, coach, the late great John Thompson, will turn 84 on September 1st. And that is it when it comes to your birthday. When it comes to birthdays, and before I go, of course, before I go, I would like to give a word of wisdom, and it is that if you don't learn how God operates, you will continue to use methods that don't work anymore. You have to learn how God operates, His methods and His strategies from His kingdom in order to function in this world. And so, and the thing is, just like He did with the children of Israel, God will remove supernatural provisions so that you can sustain yourself with the methods and guidelines that He has given us through His Word. And so, like saying, those are just points, from this past Sunday's message, the day the man ceased. And so of course, those are my words of wisdom. And that's right, absolutely. But yeah, of course, like I say, of course, I thank you very much for watching, and remember that, of course, remember that you're victorious because greater is He that's in you. But you are victorious because greater is He that's in you than He that's in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. You can also watch by way of YouTube as well. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for watching and listening. And may this day be the very best day of your